Iuno's been out for a while now, and since I've had the chance to test her out more extensively, I thought I'd deliver my more fleshed out thoughts on the character, and evaluate whether my pre-release pros and cons were accurate or not. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. The first thing that I mentioned in regards to Iuno is that she would end up being Augusta's definitive best in slot support. This did end up being the case. Naturally, she has an ability in her kit which is able to amplify Augusta's damage by up to 40%, because Augusta is able to consistently shield herself. Iuno's own provision of personal damage, and just all around being a very good heavy attack support for her, end up resulting in her being the absolute best in slot support for Augusta. Now, do you absolutely need her for Augusta? No, not at all. You're still easily able to get away with just using more Teffy. However, she is undeniably a really nice upgrade. And if you want to play the leader of Septimont at her absolute finest, then yes, Iuno's going to be able to help you achieve that. She's 100% her best in slot. And it's by enough of a margin where, if you miss out on her, it's not going to feel that bad, but if you get her, you're still going to feel the difference, and it's still going to feel quite good. It'll definitely be a substantial enough increase. It's not a Roshia situation where the increase just doesn't feel substantial at all, but I wouldn't say that it's as bad as a negative status character where they need the support in question. She's pretty well balanced in that sense in my opinion. So yes, definitely Augusta's best in slot, and by an acceptable amount. I also absolutely believe that Iuno ended up being a more of an acceptable heavy attack support. In fact, I think she's absolutely excellent in this role. I really underestimated how much better she would make my Gion feel. Seriously, his teams haven't felt this good to play in a very long time. It genuinely felt like a substantial upgrade to me, and I personally really enjoy it. As for other heavy attackers, I definitely find that she works quite nicely with Phoebe, and I've had pretty good success with that team. I've mostly been using Gion though since I've really wanted to be able to clear with him better, and I have to say, I genuinely did feel the weight of the upgrade, and I'm really happy about that. So even if you don't have Augusta, or you just have no interest in that character, you can easily get away with pairing Iuno with whatever heavy attacker you already currently have on your account. It absolutely feels like she was able to boost up the value of any heavy attacker that I currently own, and my main account doesn't even have Augusta, but she still has felt like a really valuable pull for me so far. So for that reason, I genuinely think that she achieved her role very well. She does indeed have that one restrictive aspect of her kit that basically only applies to Augusta and herself, but other than that, she still feels really good whenever you use her in other teams. So I'm personally quite pleased with how she's been balanced in that regard. Another really nice aspect of Iuno is that her personal damage is absolutely ridiculous. In fact, it's the fact that her personal damage is so good that makes her good in Gion teams in the first place. And in general, no matter where you slot her, her own contributions are really going to help out. I believe that out of all of the sub-DPSs that we currently have in the game as of now, such as Brant Wuthering Waves, Cantarella, all that sort, I think that Iuno is definitely the most damage-centric one. You could say that Brant is more damage-centric than her, especially if you own Lupa, but otherwise, I'd say that Iuno is at least on par with Brant in that sense, or at least the second most damage-oriented sub-DPS, because she definitely feels like she does a crud ton of damage, and it is a really large part of her value too. A large part of what she brings to the table is her own contributions. For example, because Gion's own hypercarry damage isn't really all that impressive anymore, Iuno's able to help compensate for that with her own insane damage, and in any other team where you slot her, her own damage is going to be quite substantial. It's a really nice bonus, and it's definitely nothing that should be neglected. If your Iuno's not doing good damage, then you're neglecting a large chunk of her value. Make sure you get a good build on her. This also means that DPS Iuno is nowhere near as niche as I initially expected it to be. That's right, it genuinely isn't that niche. Her personal damage is so high to the point where you can honestly justify using her as a main DPS, and it's not even that much of a meme team. It's not even that much of a simp team either. It is actually a good option, especially if you have Shakona and Air Rover to pair with her. And if you don't have those two, well, do you have Johnshin S2? Because that'll also work just fine. And if not those, then you can also opt to use Yinlin as her second slot teammate, and you will genuinely experience quite a strong DPS playstyle. It is kind of surprising how good this is, but considering how high Iuno's personal damage is, I shouldn't be that surprised. I did see it coming, I just didn't think it would be this good. But yes, DPS Iuno is a playstyle that is genuinely viable, and you could unironically pull her as a DPS, and she will serve just fine on your account. That is how much I want to drive home the fact that her personal damage is as good as it is. And even if you don't have her signature, that's still going to be the case. You can so easily stick her on Blazing Justice or any other pair of 5-star gauntlets and get by just fine. I do think that the worse your gauntlets are, the worse the DPS Iuno is going to feel. However, either way, the point stands that it is pretty impressive how good her DPS playstyle is when I initially thought that it was more of a meme team. So that's another thing. She is very versatile in terms of playstyle, and that's something that I really appreciate about the character. You're genuinely able to play her in so many ways, and her value ended up being a lot higher than I expected. I knew that Iuno was going to be a good character, I always had faith in that fact, but she definitely exceeded even my expectations. And moving on, she ended up having a lot of teams to play in. Because the DPS situation is actually a viable thing for her, she's ended up having a plethora of viable teams. There is no way that you have a Wuthering Waves account that cannot utilize Iuno in some way, shape, or form. She is genuinely so viable in so many ways. It honestly reminds me a lot of how Phoebe was designed. She's an amazing self-sufficient DPS, but you can easily branch out into pulling for Zani later on and have her used as a confession support. However, with a Iuno, it's basically the same thing but better, because in her case, you can use her as an Augusta support, or just a support for any other heavy attacker, or you can use her as her own self-sufficient DPS. Now, I will say that unlike Phoebe, you do ideally want at least a 5-star teammate in order to use her as a DPS. Somebody like Johnson, Yinlin, Shakona, you get the idea. At least Johnson is standard, but ideally you really want that S2 on her. But either way, the option still stands. Basically, any heavy attacker on your account is going to feel better with her. If you're a Gion main, seriously, this lady is a lifesaver. You're really going to enjoy using her because she is going to make your account feel so much better if you're really big on Gion. And if you play basically any of her heavy attacker, she's going to feel like a substantial increase. Pretty much the only heavy attacker that I wouldn't really recommend pulling Iuno for specifically would be Zani, because in that case, you would rather just get Phoebe specifically first. But either way, she has ended up with so many different characters that she can work with, and it's excellent. I genuinely think that she is such a well-rounded pull for any type of player, and because her weapon options aren't really all that restrictive, you're left with so many options. It is excellent. However, as amazing as Iuno's kit might be, we do still have to discuss whether some of her flaws were correct or not. In terms of a restrictive damage amp, I don't think this really ended up being a big deal, because in practice, she still ended up being amazing for most heavy attackers. She's still absolutely fantastic in all of her given situations, and it does apply to herself as well, not only Augusta. So at least it's also supporting her own ridiculous personal damage amount. I understand disliking it. It's not great that this ended up being restricted behind such a specific mechanic that was so obviously made for only Augusta. However, to say that her entire kit is just made for Augusta and that she's not good for any other heavy attacker would just be wrong. She is easily Gion's new bestest slot in my opinion, and she feels very smooth to play in so many different teams. Yes, it sucks that the restrictive damage amp is there, and it is a shame that it only works for Augusta, but to say that that completely ruins the whole kit would just be wrong. I did also point out that she was going to have a slightly longer rotation time, which may have put into question whether she's best in slot for certain characters or not. I am happy to say that just because she ended up being so nuts damage-wise, and she ended up playing so smoothly, this isn't really that much of a problem. Her rotation time is justified, she does a crap ton of damage assuming you've built her up well, and she honestly justifies the time that she takes on field. The only real concern that I had in relation to this was the fact that she was likely to end up not being best in slot for some characters because she was going to take too long to do her job, but this really isn't the case, so in my opinion it's a flaw that doesn't really hold up all that well. It is completely fine, and I think she is very balanced as is. She doesn't need Sanhua levels of field time. It's not like Roshia where it's too long either and she doesn't really provide her value. She definitely doesn't outstay her welcome, and she does what she has to do. I also mentioned being concerned that she'd be quite replaceable. Now, that was once again under the assumption that she wouldn't really be best in slot out of any situation outside of Augusta teams, but because she makes Gion teams feel so much better, no, I think she justifies her value on an account, especially if you like Gion. Yes, if you're an Augusta main, you will be pleased with your investment, you do get what you pull for. However, if you're a Gion main especially, you're definitely going to feel the difference. It is night and day. Because I was mostly worried about the fact that other limited 5-stars could replace Iuno and do her job better, if not just at the same amount. But that's not the case. She ended up being very good, and in my opinion, I feel like she definitely justifies her existence on an account. So, with that being said, you still very much can just use Air Rover Shakona with Gion if you so choose, but at least Iuno is better, and she can justify being pulled for. And that is the main thing. She definitely justifies her existence. So, now for the moment that you've all been waiting for. Where do I currently think that Iuno stands in the meta? I honestly have glowing opinions on her, because it seems like Kuro Games has repeated a kit design that I thought was very good. That being Phoebe's, except they made it even more flexible. Now, Do I think that Iuno's as free-to-play friendly as Phoebe? Not necessarily, because the nice thing with her is that the Acolyte is super beginner friendly. Everybody has Spectre Rover. Everybody has at least one S0 Sanhua. You can so easily form a team for that character with literally free units. However, I still think that Iuno's a really good pull, all things considered, and a really good beginner pull if you think about it. Because there's just so many freaking characters that you can pair her with. It's absolutely excellent. So, I honestly think that she is a really well-made unit. I think Kuro did a really good job with her, and this is the perfect balance. Let's not go back to Roshia, let's not make wasteful 5 stars, but let's not go to the other end of the spectrum where we have negative status characters that need a specific support. This is such a good middle ground. It doesn't feel like an insane detriment to your Augusta team to not have her, but she is still an excellent upgrade, so you're gonna feel justified no matter what choice you make, and you're going to feel very rewarded if you invest into her, so that you can boost up some of your older DPSs. Such a good kit design, I love it, I am a really big fan. Hopefully this video was able to tell you my opinions on Iuno now that we've had her up for a while. This has been Juice, signing out, and at last she finally exists again.